Hello YouTube. I already demonstrated the significance of the year 1966 for the global UFO phenomenon. The events of that year, sightings, encounters involved United States, USSR, Australia, and other parts of the world. Future American President Gerald Ford, Florida's governor, people in Uzbekistan, people on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and much more. Some even contacted me, telling me their sightings that year, after my first video about that year of 1966. We do not know the extent of the global international UFO wave, but that does not mean that those who are obliged to research UFOs for various governments in different nations are not aware. Today I will talk about another encounter from 1966, among other things, in a very mysterious place called Easter Island. The encounter involved Soviet submarines on a top-secret mission. As you can imagine, civilian researchers like me cannot have extensive details about such missions. Still classified. But some information leaked out, and there have been very interesting rumors in the former USSR. And I'll share what I'll know. Also, there is information about Easter Island in Russia that has not been available or is a little known in the West. And I'm very curious to know as to the reason why. The Russians and then the Soviets have done their own research of this most mysterious island and also observe what the others have been doing about it. Now let's look at a very fascinating secret mission undertaken by Soviet Navy in the year of 1966. Two nuclear submarines were selected to participate in the mission, K-116 and K-133 designations. Both subs were so-called firstborns of the domestic nuclear submarine fleet. They carried out military service in the Arctic and Pacific Ocean, including surfacing at the North Pole. The head of the submarine detachment was Rear Admiral Anatoly Sorokin, who served on nuclear submarines from the very beginning of their creation. The commander of K-116, whose crew was from the Pacific Fleet, was an experienced submariner, captain of second rank, Vyacheslav Vinogradov. I do want to remind you about the information I have presented about the Pacific Fleet, about the whole area of the Far East, and the numerous UFO and USO sightings in the area. Now, submarine K-133 was commanded by Captain Second Rank Lev Stolyarov, experienced people who knew what they were doing. Preparation for the trip was conducted in complete secrecy. The crews were checked by medics and Soviet counterintelligence. The submarines had undergone an additional inspection involving experts and including sub-designers. In view of the high tension in the relations between the United States and the USSR, nuclear weapons were also on board, and the crews were told that those weapons would undergo tests. Much attention was paid to ensuring the secrecy of the passage, as the Soviet submariners had to overcome several anti-submarine posts of NATO. The submarines entered Barents Sea, dived into the ocean depths, and disappeared until March 26, 1966. Their passage was monitored in the main headquarters of the Soviet Navy during the periods of open communication. Russian media learned about some details of this secret operation from one of the participants of the circumnavigational trip, a nuclear scientist and doctor of technical sciences, Anatoly Chechurov. I heard other interesting rumors about the mission, and due to its almost complete secrecy, there is not much we can go on. Chechurov's testimony is great, But there is one interesting aspect involving him that I'll mention towards the end. On the evening of February 1st, 1966, two submarines left the Zapadnaya Litsa submarine base in the Litsa Fjord at the westernmost point of the Kola Peninsula and entered the Barents Sea. The mission and its purpose were unknown to the crew and the civilians aboard. Only after the dive did Admiral Sorokin announce on the intercom that they had to perform a unique task: cruise around the world. The task was unusual. In the underwater position to make a passage across the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean, visit the southern hemisphere, and finally get moored on the Soviet Kamchatka Peninsula. They had to travel more than 20,000 miles in the ocean depths, and it was strictly forbidden to float. To surface, the two Soviet subs had to pass unnoticed through all American stations of observation of foreign submarines. There was some sort of a precedent. In 1960, the American nuclear submarine Triton cruised around the globe for 84 days, but according to the Soviets, it surfaced several times and visited American naval bases it encountered on its way. The Soviets decided to surpass the Americans and make their mission more complicated and more difficult. Remember, we're talking about official explanations, but there was something else. Now, first, it was a completely autonomous, completely secretive underwater passage, and it had to be carried out not on a solitary submarine, but a group of submarines. This arrangement presented complicated requirements for navigation and communications. In addition, Soviet subs had to traverse across unfamiliar territories of the oceans. Even though centuries before Russian sailors sailed those waters, but as you can understand, that was in a different country per se, Russian Empire, and at a different time. Eventually, the mission was completed. On March 26, both nuclear submarines safely reached Kamchatka after 52 days and more than 20,000 miles. They passed through three oceans, Northern, Atlantic, and Pacific, and the length of the route is just equal to the length of the equator. So this Soviet mission gave them the achievement of the underwater passage around the world, the underwater cruise. When later information about this passage leaked abroad, the Americans at first officially, categorically stated, it is impossible. That meant that they did not detect Soviet submarines. And yet, later the United States leadership had to recognize the unfortunate fact for them. The Soviet submarines managed to sneak unnoticed, and K-116 and K-133 were never detected during all of their long voyage by anti-submarine systems of NATO. We will not discuss the entire mission, although it was very interesting even based on the incomplete information at my disposal. When the periscope was up, only the captains and the navigator were allowed to look into it, and Chichurov. The exception made personally by Admiral Sorokin, and this allowed Chichurov to see the strange color of the sea in the area of Easter Island. It was violet. So let's concentrate on that most interesting island and what the Soviets experienced. On March 9, submarines entered the South Pacific and headed for Easter Island. An unpleasant incident occurred when K-133 entered the Pacific Ocean. Because of the sharp change in the density of water, there was change in the weight of the submarine. The water was pumped out of the equalization tank. And then there was a mechanical issue aboard the submarine K-116, and it was taken care of. And in the area of Easter Island, the Soviet submarines encountered dangers. The Soviet intelligence had information that the Americans were planning to build a new base on the island. So the Soviet submarines had to approach it and carefully study the coast through periscopes. However, the plan could not be fully implemented. On the approach to the island, apparently due to a sharp change in the density of water, the boat K-116 began to descend. Because of the competent actions of the crew, they managed to prevent the sinking. So the order was given to ascend. As a result, the risky operation was abandoned. But another danger awaited the Soviets. It was a USO, unidentified submersible object. And I don't have a lot of details. You can imagine the anxiety experienced by Soviet submariners who knew that Americans had submarine tracking stations in the area. Suddenly, the acoustic technicians reported that their devices registered approach with an unknown, very large underwater object that quickly moved towards the Soviet submarines. They assumed that it was an American submarine and went into the combat mode. They were also afraid that an unidentified underwater object could create a ram. But according to Chechurov, a foreign submarine, if it was a submarine, a short time later abruptly changed the course and turned aside. Nobody rammed Soviet submarines. Apparently, whoever was aboard that strange object, he thought, also found a meeting with a strange object not very conductive, but whoever was there could not assume that it was a nuclear-powered submarine. That was Chechurov's thinking. Now, the rumors I heard were that it was a gigantic underwater object and it moved at incredible speed, and the Soviets were flabbergasted. But despite the years that have passed since 1966, as I mentioned, the mission is still shrouded in secrecy. When Chechurov arrived at the base in Kamchatka, he soon thereafter flew to Moscow. As far as he knew, the crews of both ice-breaking nuclear submarines continued their military service in the Far East. For that unequaled mission, the participants received high Soviet awards and medals. As for the secrecy, only sometime later, at the 23rd Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the then Minister of Defense Malinovsky, in his speech, briefly mentioned the successful navigation of Soviet submarines through 3 oceans. This news quickly flew around the whole world and became a real sensation. Chechurov had to keep silent about this episode of his biography for many years. Even in his closed to others Kurchatov Institute of Nuclear Energy Research, he didn't talk too much. He couldn't talk about the mission. He was not allowed to. Chechurov did reveal some details to the 2 luminaries of Soviet science, Alexandrov and Khlopin, in their homes and in private conversations behind closed doors. He could not even dream of any scientific publications based on his studies and observations during the passage, and his diaries and notes from that submarine cruise were submitted to the KGB representative at the Kurchatov Institute and never returned. And with all this secrecy, something very curious took place. When the submarines moored in Kamchatka, before going ashore, Chechurov found the map of the voyage hanging on the bulkhead, seemingly abandoned. So the scientist took it off and took the map with him. He showed only to his immediate institute superiors and no one else this top secret document. I have my doubts actually about the Soviet-American Cold War hostilities or rivalries when it came to UFOs and USOs. I really doubt that the Americans did not know about the mission. And I think that Chichurov did not know about the real interest that the mission commanders had regarding Easter Island. There may be even more to his involvement. I think the map was deliberately left for him to take. It was most likely part of the Soviet counterintelligence operation, in case he was being followed by foreign intelligence officers or someone else. If so, was the map that the Soviet scientist took with him real? I think most likely. I will mention other Soviet visits to the island, open visits, and why they were allowed on the island, and the ease of their stay on the mysterious island. And I'm going to tell you about Russian knowledge about this very unusual island and my curiosity as to why such information is not widely available in the West. There is something that is lurking in the waters surrounding this mysterious island. But is it made by terrestrial defense factories? Is it a foreign submarine of unknown proportions? Or is it something else? For those who do not know, Easter Island, a territory of Chile, is located in the southeastern Pacific Ocean, about 4,000 kilometers west of the Chilean mainland. Though still largely unexplored, Easter Island's waters are known to contain geological hotspots and areas of rare biodiversity. Its geographical location, so far away from other inhabited islands, makes it one of the most isolated places on Earth. Its ancient inhabitants called it Tepito Otohenua, the navel of the world. The volcanic origin of the island made it an ideal quarry, so that the primitive inhabitants, if they were primitive, built almost 900 stone statues worldwide known as Moai, and the altars called Ahu. There are 3 extinct volcanoes that are the main ones. The largest is called Maunga Terevaka. There are more. The Chilean government has created recently 2 new marine protected areas, and one of them is very extensive in the Easter Island area. Now, currently Easter Island is one of the main tourist attractions in Chile because of its beauty, geography, and the enigmatic Rapa Nui culture. By the way, I talked to some divers through the years who spent time around the island, scuba diving. They said that it is the formations, both natural and man-made, that really stand out when diving at Easter Island waters. Tunnels, caves, walls, and amazing lava formations, and much more. Easter Island is tropical. The water there is strikingly blue and clear. There's marine life around there and few sharks, but they saw a lot of twisted volcanic rock and coral. There are solidified lava flows and the stunning submarine scenery. And there is an underwater Moai statue, which is an incredible sight, about 7 meters in height. And this huge carving is sitting on the ocean floor, looking into the abyss that surrounds it. But it is not genuine. It was actually a prop from Kevin Costner's movie that never made it to the screen, called Rapa Nui. It was dropped in the ocean in 1994. It's like a 700-ton fiberglass and metal Moai that was dropped via water parachute into the ocean of Easter Island. So basically it was discarded and it's lying there on the ocean floor. The original Moai were carved from stone in a quarry on the northeastern part of the island, and there is great speculation as to how these huge statues were moved to their final resting places. Some say they were rolled on wooden logs, but there are many other explanations. It is known that the statues were carved out of the stone, and a visit to the quarry will reveal half-finished Moai. in Moai that were finished yet never moved. One unfinished Moai is actually still lying down in the rock face from which it was carved. Now, Easter Island, known as Rapa Nui by its inhabitants, has been surrounded by mystery ever since the Europeans first landed in 1722. Early visitors estimated a population of about 1,500 to 3,000, which seemed at odds with the nearly 900 giant statues that are lying around the island. That Norwegian explorer and anthropologist Thor Heyerdahl, who led archaeological expeditions to Easter Island in 1955-56 and 1986-1988. He knew a lot, but I'll talk more about him and ancient mysteries of the island a little bit later. Genetic research has shown that Easter Island was settled by about 40 Polynesians, who landed on the island about 700 AD and went on undisputed for several centuries. Now that's scientific data. I'll share it with you, but I suggest you do your own research, because there is a lot of speculation. Now the scientists believe that during that time the population grew, reaching a total of about 10,000 at its height, about 1000 AD. The original Easter Islanders were hunters and fishers, relying on the large variety of birds that made the island, covered at the time with lush palm tree forest, their home. The most striking feature of the island, again, is the Moai, which I mentioned. And that was interesting, and there are more than 300 unfinished Moai that are still in place. And the largest unfinished statue at Rongorongo is over 60 feet tall. The largest of the statues has a weight of 270 tons. I was always fascinated how they were moved, because Moai were moved by the islanders to the distances of up to 10 miles to prepare sites all over the island. They were set upright and decorated with inlaid coral eyes and a pukao, a head of red scoria. The precise manner in which the Moai were transported across the island, whether dragged horizontally or walked upright, has also been debated, and there's been a lot of new interesting archaeological finding about how far down under the underground the Moai bodies extend. Now, Easter Island once also had an apparent script called Rongorongo. Glyphs include pictographic and geometric shapes. The texts were incised in wood in reverse boustrophophedon direction. It was first reported by a French missionary in 1864. That's, by the way, 2 years after the slave owners or slave raiders and others basically decimated the island population. In 1864, at that time, several islanders said that they could understand the writing, but according to tradition, only ruling families and priests were ever literate, and none survived the slave raids and subsequent epidemics. Despite numerous attempts, the surviving texts could have not been deciphered, and without a decipherment, it is not certain that they are actually writing. But that's one view. There are people in Russia, or were people in Russia, who actually claim to decipher Rongorongo. The part with the Rongorongo is that just a small amount has survived. I think only 2,000 texts, and none of them remain on the island actually. So ongoing archaeological research about Easter Island concerns the reasons for the environmental degradation and the end of the society around 1500 AD, or Common Era. The dating of all events at Easter Island is under debate as well, with some researchers arguing the original colonization took place later, or that the birds and palm trees were gone as nearly as 900 AD. Most argue that the major deforestation took place over a period of about 200 years, which 200 years seems to be the biggest question. How did this small community construct, transport, and erect those large rock statues or figures? The roughly triangular-shaped island has an area of about 164 square kilometers, I think about 63 square miles, and it has three main extinct volcanoes, one in each corner of the triangle. The highest volcano reaches a maximum elevation of about 500 meters. The Moai are not the only archaeological feature on the island that has attracted the interest of international scholars. A handful of Rapa Nui houses are also shaped like canoes. Now, I want to look at some information from Russia about the island, which again is not widely known in the West. Interesting data about underwater exploration of the ocean floor near Easter Island comes from one Australian man by the name of Howard Tirloren, who arrived to the island along with Jacques Cousteau as part of its team. This was in 1978, and they researched in great detail the ocean floor around the island in bathyscaphe or submersible. Apparently, they confirmed that mountains are located under the water, even at small depths, of unusual appearance. Some mountains even had holes resembling connectors for windows. Also, Jacques-Yves Cousteau found a strange deep hollow near the area where he dived after 3 more days. When he returned, Cousteau wanted to explore this basin even more diligently. His eyes were burning with excitement. But Cousteau could not see anything in full dark. He said that at the bottom of the walls one can see the silhouettes, forming something like a section of the city. However, because of the Chilean political police, they could not really explore all the areas they wanted to see. Tirloren claims that they were forced to endorse or sign the non-disclosure documents, and the police demanded they stop the investigation, so all work was stopped. But what is so unusual in that underwater depression? Why the Chilean security services do it? Why were they afraid of scientists? It still remains a mystery. After Pinochet was gone, the issue was raised again, but to no avail. The Chilean government does not want to share the information. Tirloren believed that there was actually one of the wandering islands observed in the waters of Easter Island. The Australian revealed this information to Russian journalist Zotov in 2005. I ask, is there an underwater alien base or an underwater civilization that exists near the island? Did the Soviets know about it and were working together with the Americans in that memorable year of 1966, memorable for UFO sightings and encounters? Not all of them safe ones. Were they working together, or did they do their own investigation? The Soviets actually were able to cruise easily through the NATO-controlled waters, and their main destination looks to be Easter Island. Here's another piece of the puzzle, and the information is from Russia. From 1973 to 1977, 7 leading American ocean explorers researched oceanic trenches near Easter Island. They studied Sala y Gomez Reach. As a result of their investigation, the scientists discovered 65 underwater mountains and confirmed in this area several thousand years ago existed a known archipelago which sank to the bottom, while all their research work was stopped by orders of the Chilean government, at the time headed by Pinochet. The scientists were not able to discover paved roads at the bottom of the ocean. What paved roads? I'll get to them, but listen to this. When I looked up Google information on Sala y Gomez, I found very interesting reference on one of the geographic pages. And here's what it said. The information regarding Sala Igomas Ridge in undersea features on this page is published from the data supplied by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, a member of the intelligence community of the United States of America, and a Department of Defense Combat Support Agency. No claims are made regarding the accuracy of Sala Igomas Ridge information contained here. All suggestions for corrections of any errors about Sala Igomas Ridge should be addressed to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. My field of research is Russian and Eurasian paranormal, so I'm not really interested in what the American government knows about Easter Island, but I'm interested in what the Russians knew about it, because this island was of quite interest to them. Now, according to Russian researchers, Easter Island was once part of a much larger territory. There are paved roads 3.5 meters wide leading straight into the ocean, and hundreds of underground passages that begin in natural caves of the island and lead to an unknown destination. And here is where I want to discuss Norwegian adventurer and archaeologist Thor Heyerdahl, who traveled from Peru to Polynesia aboard the Kon-Tiki in 1947. He also led expeditions in the Galapagos Islands and on Easter Island. According to the Soviet author Kondratov, in his book titled Secrets of Three Oceans, published in 1971, Heyerdahl revealed the following. It's fascinating, but I also want you to remember the year of 1971. Now, what I'm about to read to you is translated from Russian, so there may be differences with the original text, but nothing major. So, it goes like this. Really, asked Thor Heyerdahl, telling about his research on Easter Island. Why don't we take a walk on those paved roads? Our expedition had a diver, and together with him, we headed to the nearest paved road that disappeared in the ocean's depth. This was an incomparable spectacle. Our diver, in a green suit, an oxygen mask with a trunk, thundering on the white paved road with his shoes. In one hand, he was holding fiery red tank with a camera. It resembled a ship's lantern. He waved to us with his other hand, with grace, and left from the dry pavement straight into the ocean. The search was long, but the diver did not see any statues, platforms, or the continuation of the road itself. It just reached the edge of the water, and further there were only ledges, corals, and deep fissures. And then the underwater slope fell into the abyss. And there the diver saw a few gigantic fish. Now, I ask, did anyone study those paved roads since Heyerdahl and Cousteau? Were they allowed to? Do you know who edited Kondratov's book? No other than the Soviet scientist Zhirov, who published his tremendously informative book about Atlantis years ago in the USSR. It took him years to compile all the information, and it is still the best scientific research book about the lost Atlantis. And I believe you can find English translation, and I urge you to read it. Zhirov believed the determination of the research works to find the underwater paved roads was a mistake. Scientists could have discovered continuation of the paved roads on the bottom of the ocean. Zhirov himself had a very interesting biography, but that's outside of the subject for this video, and I'll get back to it later when I present more videos about Soviet research of the Atlantis phenomenon. Let's get back to the Soviet visits to the island. In 1957, the well-known Soviet diesel electrical vessel Obi from the 3rd Soviet Antarctic Expedition visited Easter Island. Its captain was famous Ivan Mann, who worked in the Arctic, the Far East, and the Black Sea. It circumnavigated the world too and received awards in a number of countries. Most likely it had a KGB agent among its crew, as it was a Soviet vessel in international waters. According to Soviet writers, when it was anchored by the shore of Rapa Nui, local government officials asked the Russians to lend them the crew to help them increase the population that suffered from interbreeding. Safety was assured for Soviet sailors, and the locals really needed help and fresh blood. So Captain Ivan Man, who was a kind and forward-looking person, obliged, and the Russian sailors spent 24 hours on the island. After all, they spent so many long months at sea, isolated from the world. Of course, if such an event happened in Cape Town or another major harbor, the Soviet captain would not risk it. But this was a faraway, tiny island, so he allowed the sailors to take a rest. Obviously, this was not documented, and his order was conveyed carefully. Most likely, the KGB agent, if there was one aboard, also participated and helped the local women increase population. And all the Russian sailors from the first Atlantic expeditions remembered this adventure years later. No punishment ever followed, as there was no proof of the event. So, among the inhabitants of Angaro on the island, maybe some mixed Russian blood. But we also need to mention that two more Soviet vessels followed in 1963 and 1964. The island was quite an attraction to the Soviets for many reasons. And in 1972, 1 year after Kondratov's book was published, a very important Soviet scientific vessel called Dmitry Mendeleev visited the island, conducted scientific research, and created a geological map of the island. I am sure they didn't find any secret American bases, but whether they found anything else, we do not know. But that Soviet ship did visit small island of Sala y Gomez. In the language of the Easter Island people, the name of that little island is Manu Moto Matiro Hiva, or Bird Island, on the way to Hiva. Hiva or Hiva denotes mythical land in the Polynesian epos of Easter Island. There's another island near Easter Island that the Russians seem to know more about than anybody else I've read. The name is Motu Nui, and it was used for the birdman Tangata Manu cult. It is the largest island of the coast of Easter Island. Back in the past, brave young men used to swim to the island to collect eggs and bring them back to the shore. The last known birdman competition was held in 1888. The small island is slightly white-colored at the top, and this is due to the bird droppings, guano. Interesting, this island is the top of a huge volcanic mountain, which lies on the ocean bed and measures over 2,000 meters. The little island is made of volcanic lava that descended into the ocean ages ago. There are numerous underwater passages that lead who knows where. A number of people disappeared in the mazes down below, and the government of Easter Island forbade any further attempts to reach the lower levels of the volcanic catacombs. Mota Nui has a made out of stone platform that previously contained gigantic Moai. He later cast into the ocean by tsunami, earthquakes, or people. How could people build the platform Ahu with Moai there? We cannot even reach the island with boats. It is impossible to reach that area by climbing the rocks. Such were the questions posed by French writer and explorer Francis Mazière. He headed the French expedition to the island in 1962. He wrote fascinating books. One of them, I believe, is Mysteries of Easter Island. And Francis Mazier explores the legends of the statues and the lost land of Hiva, or Haiva. This explorer said that Easter Island contains some really inexplicable or still unexplained geological secrets. And this forces us to seriously pay attention to the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. That's what he said. Mazier believed that the island was subjected to powerful radiation during the contact, and the islanders retained that experience in their souls, and there are still memories of it today. He points out carved figurines from the island, and the images they demonstrate that possibly point to powerful radiation and the effect on the people. In 1949, one of the pioneers of the Soviet marine geology, Rear Admiral Zubov, came out with the hypothesis that Easter Island was something like Mecca of Oceania, where people of the numerous islands would come to stay. Maybe there was something between this Mecca and other archipelagos. Probably there were communications, but most of the archipelagos are now sunk at the bottom of the ocean. And yes, we know that in the area of the Easter Island there were discovered many underwater mountains, which could have been islands ages ago. Interestingly, another Soviet geologist, Belousov, said that the contemporary underwater plateau Albatross it previously was actual dry land, somehow connected with Easter Island. And Soviet scientist Panov, an expert in geography, believes that there was a giant Easter Island which would extend far into the central part of the ocean. There is another view in the Soviet Union and Russia, and again it includes Belousov. They believe that Pasifida in the Pacific Ocean really existed, and it's fascinating, all this information, and I encourage you to research it. There's more to the Russian research of the island, including the story. I've not heard too many confirmations about it, about one of the little statues, one of the figurines discovered in Catalonia, Spain, in 1975. Soviets studied it as well. The attempts to decipher Rongorongo, Thor Heyerdahl's connections to Russian researchers, and there is more for those who are interested. But all this is beyond the scope of my research. I understand that the Soviets really wanted to know about the underwater secrets, and I believe there is an underwater alien base in the area of Easter Island, or maybe the site of ancient civilizations. For me personally, when I was a Soviet schoolboy, like many others, I read a wonderful science fiction book, Secrets of Two Oceans, or Mystery of Two Oceans, written by Georgy Adamov. And this is where I found out first interesting information about Easter Island. So I decided to do real research years later. But it's all somewhat still surrounded by mysteries, and some of the information, as you can understand, is classified. Now, I believe that Americans and Russians work together at levels we cannot even imagine to encounter, study, and maybe neutralize those strange underwater submersible objects. And Easter Island is one of the places where they have done it. And that year, 1966, is a very significant one in the history of UFO and UFO encounters on this planet. I have more videos about USOs and Russian submarines, and Philip Mantle and we co-authored a book about Russia's USO secrets. I will present more information, so I ask that you please subscribe to my channel. Please support my research, and I really thank you for your attention. There is so much more to explore on our planet and to reveal what others have encountered in their research.